How's it going, everyone? We're going to explore now the server and the client-side components in React using now Next to understand now what Next.js behind the scenes are doing. And so by default, Next.js, which is this framework that I'm not going to dive deep too much into the details, because what we really care into this video is to now truly understand and create now a component, very silly component, to look at React server and client-side components, also Next.js, especially the Next 13, and what it's doing behind the scenes to treat these two particular components. So, because now in Next, everything is now servers are rendering by default, okay? And Next.js provide all of the infrastructure needed to create its web applications. So starting from the transpiling from React components from JSX to JavaScript. And why we use JSX? Because this is a more straightforward, convenient way to writing our React components. In this case, React, after the end of the day, is just a wrapper around the DOM. So anytime you want to create a React components, you in fact are calling that library and then run the method called create elements, and that is going to be actually is creating that element and attached to the DOM via the root.render. All right, and then you can tell to the library, hey, this is the component that I want you to render, and this is the HTML tag that I want you to append that. So this is quite interesting. So yeah, so Next.js actually now make it easy for the to work with JSX with the transpiling phase. Also the linter, the formatting, the unit testings, and all for working with, or when it comes to work with different rendering methods, such as client-side rendering or server-side rendering. And what it's doing behind the scenes actually is provide us a way to make that, it provide a default way to doing that kind of stuff. And also the file-based routing, which is something that is new to Next.js 13 and 14 and 15 and so on. And now here we define just a couple of routes here, just describing is, for example, the dashboard and the marketing, this grouping routes. You have to be careful because all of them are now sits on the root. So if you have now the same segment, the same URL segment, now Next is smart enough to actually detect the last one. So for example, if we run this, at least this is the package JSON here. We're using is Next 13, that's right. Next 13, let me actually do is npm run def. So cool. So if we navigate to the to-dos, let's get in. Wait, what? So if we navigate to the to-dos here, it will show is the marketing page. Yes, so it's important to understand this, how now Next.js are solving this conflict behind the scenes. And we also look at how can we pass now data to that. So for example, if you want to pass now dynamic data to this route, you say, hey, let me actually rename now the to-dos, okay? All right, and say something like this, say, hey, this will be the to-dos, right? And I'm going to now pass some folder here and say, hey, I want to pass some data to this. All right. some data, let's say an ID for that, and I want to also include that here, right? So inside of this you can say, hey, let's just page.tsx, right? And let me actually now render some dynamic counting here, where you can get this as pattern, no, metadata, unstable catch, or the ID, say patterns, right? And you say, hey, this will be now is the patterns.id, right? That's right. So you can say, hey, this now will be is the to do marketing page, to do marketing dynamic page, right? Dynamic page, here you say, hey, this will be to do marketing dynamic page, right? And if we get access to that, we say, hey, whatever is on the after that route, which is the slug, I want you to render that as it is, right? And then you get all of this data. So this is how you can actually is now pass some dynamic data to that. So that's the basics of Next and in itself. In Next 13 is now make this routing mechanism, well, following is the file-based routing. Okay, we also went through how on each one of those pages that you define, you have some of these components per page that are very convenient. So for example, to define the layout and the template, and the subtle difference is that templates is something that you want to re-render, whereas layout is fixed. It only renders once. You also have loading, the error state or not found, right? Very interesting, pretty powerful stuff to help us in this stuff of developing applications. Now, so before moving on and understand now the rendering modes that React has by default, because the rendering mode is the way of how React or Next treat all of those elements, especially all of the component that you define inside of the file, inside of your routing. It is done by servers. It is through server-side rendering. It means that because we can define here is, let's say, our components, right? Our component folders. They say, hey, components, and inside of a component we can define is now a to-do.tsx followed by the to-do list.tsx. All right. But all of them must be in uppercase. To do. This is more like a convention, followed by the to do here as well. So hey, this is the to do, and also you have now a to do form.tsx, right? So if you want, for example, create now a component, let's move on to here, right? So let's say you want to create now a client-side component. We also, in previous videos, briefly described what server-side components are. That is components that are now run on the server, okay? And that by the time that those components are called, the bundler, which now create is the server side render components and the client components all in one bundle. And I think this that description is important to understand that. Let's say installation, you're gonna describe the UI, interactivity. Wait, what is on the reference and no on the server components, and because server components here, okay, the bundler, whatever bundle you want to go with, okay, whether it's Vita or Parcel or Metro for React Native applications, the bundler combines the data, the data, render server components, and dynamic client components into a bundle. So we combine these three stuff here. And optionally, the bundler, which is what happened here, optionally the bundler can server-side exactly. Optionally, that bundle can then server-side render. In this case, the bundler is Next.js to create the initial HTML for the page. Therefore, when the page loads, the browser doesn't see the original components that we're gonna describe here, which is a normal component. Say, hey, cons to do form, which is just a plain JavaScript function, right? That we say, hey, I would like you to return now a div, okay, followed by the a very silly form, and then the label HTML4. Thanks for autocomplete that. You say, hey, this will be now the name. Say name, and then you have now here is the input attached to that, right? You say, hey, with the ID of name, right? And if you want to provide now interactivity through the use state, okay, you say, hey, initially will be is, hey, Joe, and since this function return now is a tuple call where the first, and the tuple is interesting because this is how now arrays plays in JavaScript. Objects and array plays two roles here. It can be is a tuple, where it's a fixed collections of elements with where each one of those elements can be different, or an array, which is a non-fixed length of elements, which is aka like a linked list, where all of these elements must be the same. So in this case is now a tuple that is returned us is the setter. Let's say, hey, this will be the input, and this the value in the setter function is input set input, right? Or say set name, right? Name, and then you say, okay, I want you both of them be assigned to a variable, and then whenever this, so whenever a value you have on name, I want to show that, and on change, okay, I want now to run is this particular function. What we're doing is this inline function. So whatever value you're getting from the event as an event handler, I want you to now is called this set name with the event.target value. Right. So if we go back now to what we care, which is here. Okay, go back to what we care, which is here. Well, and if we navigate to this, let me actually now import these components here on, let's say, the page here under the docs. So I don't want to actually render this. If I just want to render is this to do marketing here, and then do something like this. Say, hey, put it here right below. Say, hey, to do form, right? I don't think I'm exporting that. That's why it is doing this. Say, hey, export default to do forms, right? Now import that to do forms from the alias here, since this is a component that we're not having any data. Say it now is actually complaining about this, right? Because by default, all right, by default, React now Next server everything in the server.
Log level storage. You can see right now I get an error.
So
Component won't be server side.
So we can say it's like, hey, we can add that directive to the component, all right, and then you say, hey, this is now a next React 18. We say, hey, use client this directive, okay, and then now we go back to this and we pass now to the to-dos, right? It says actually now server and sending the client as it is. It's actually showing that as expected. All right. It actually let me actually remove this console log process here. Right. Yeah, this is because I just want to show this, but not any longer. You need to define a base URL for that, and to gonna load that. Okay. So as you can see, if you reload this on D, and if we import some sort of code here, for example, hey, I want to now this component, you say, hey, use client, right, as a directive, and say, hey, I want you to now, when you render this component, want to take a look now at the window objects. Okay. So by default, when we render that, and the server side, it say, hey, we throw an error. This is because, like this, hey, we throw an error. This is because by default, everything here in Next is server-side render.
It probably still will be server-side rendered. Like, I don't know if I throw like, let's see what happens if I do this. As if I say log local storage. You can see right now I get an error, right? Even though it's a client component, it's still rendered on the server, and that's because there's a difference between server-side rendering and a React server component. By default, Next.js is going to try to render everything on the server. Even this, so that doesn't mean I can go in.
Perhaps at least in React in 13. Exactly. And exactly. where we say it's like, hey, me actually is say give exactly. So escape character, escaping character. With a message, you say, hey, I want to say, hey, git commit this. What I want to create now is a PR here, right? By saying is git switch to the branch feed server rendering client versus server component. Okay, and here I can say, hey, git status, git commit with a message, which is first commit. Right, and then you see a git push origin to client versus server components, right? And if you want to create now a new merge for that, you say, hey, it's a first commit showing or illustrate like that. So illustrate that illustrate React directive with use client. You say, hey, say use client. All right, and how now in Next.js 13 everything is server side rendering. So the following error is expected to be when running, to be on the server to show this. So here we say, hey, it's gonna now clear. It's gonna now render that. Say we run it, and we navigate to that. Say, hey, this is to do. It of course on the client now render that, but exactly. But it now on the client is a hey, no. So this is now the client. This is now on the client, and this is now on the server. Okay, so we take a look at the finder, and you say, hey, this is on the server, and this is on the client, right? So that's great. Client and server. So you create this pull request here, and because this is our We don't have any GitHub CI/CD pipeline, so you can say, yeah, I want to merge this, confirm merge, and there you got it. And it was merged, right? Okay, but that is what it happened behind the
just
scenes.
like start doing browser stuff, I would still have to check to make sure that like, if I'm in the browser or not. But this is a client component. So remember, server-side rendering is this component is going to be rendered on the server, but then there's going to be some JavaScript that gets downloaded that is the exact replica of this component that then takes over, right? But we couldn't get to that point yet because I logged a window up here, which broke on the server because there's no window on the server. That's server-side rendering. A server component is like the same thing, except for there's no JavaScript in the front end that takes over, right? And the entire component.
So the server component is now, it doesn't have any interactivity, and is closer to the source of the data.
But it's executed on the server, so I can do database things. Like I couldn't come in here and like log process or use Redis or async. I couldn't do that here. This would not work because it's not executed on the server. It's just rendered on the server.
Exactly. This is different because this is rendering on the server.
So that's how you would do that. You would just use client. And that also means you can use client components in server components and vice versa. The only thing that you can't do is pass props between them, right? Or, I'm sorry, you can't pass non-serializable
You
props between them.
cannot pass.
So what does that mean? Let's say I have some props here that says like on change, right? It says on change prop, which means it's probably a function, okay? Then I go to page, and I'm like, cool, yeah, on change. Like let's pass in a function here, something like that. Hello, okay, and then we try to refresh this, it's gonna break. Event handlers cannot be passed to client component props. If you need interactivity, consider converting part of this to a client component. Right, it literally tells you. So what does that actually mean? It's saying, hey, the reason it says that is because you cannot serialize a function. If you don't know what I mean by serialize a function, this is what I mean. So if I go into the console, and I do something like this, right? Let's say I say JSON dot stringify this object, right? This object has like a name.
Exactly, it's to serialize that.
And then it has like an action, and this action is a function that does something. Okay. If I stringify this, what do you think the JSON is gonna look like?
No, it won't the.
I guess it doesn't like that. Let me be specific since it doesn't like that. Okay. Yeah, it's totally going to blow up. Well,
exactly.
I guess I'm missing a bracket here. There we go. Okay. So
that's interesting because JSON stringify is parse everything except functions.
What it actually did was it just didn't carry this over, this function.
Because you are not able to actually functionality.
You can't serialize.
You can't serialize
logic, at least not this way. Not with stringify. There are ways you can do it, and some people do it, but by default, it's not going to get carried over. And because you have a client component and a server component, that communication has to go across the network barrier. So it has to go through the network. And to go through the network, you need to be serialized because you can't just send code through the network. It has to be something that is understood, data, in this case JSON. But when you try to stringify.
So when they define this stringify, or when they define this now serialization here, is because you cannot send its logic through the cable. Because that involves a lot of work behind the scenes. Actually, try to encode and decode. That's what they say. No. You know what? We're not gonna serialize logic. Okay, we just only serialize data. Period. This is quite interesting. Very, very interesting. When you say serialize.
By a function, yeah, it's not going to be there. So this is why you can't pass functions as props because they can't be serialized. There are other values that can't be serialized as well, like dates. You can't serialize a date. You can't serialize recursive things that are like cyclic in nature. So an object that points to itself somewhere, can't serialize that. So things like that, you have restrictions around that. So those are the only caveats. So an object that points to itself somewhere, can't serialize that. So things like that, you have restrictions around that. You can't serialize recursive, that can't pass functions as props because they can't be serialized. There are other values that can't be serialized as well, like dates. You can't serialize a date. You can't serialize recursive things that are like cyclic in nature. So an object that points to itself somewhere, can't serialize that. So things like that, you have restrictions around that. So
But this is, you have the restriction to actually now what are the data that you can serialize and send over the cable. Those simple dates, of course, you can serialize that, and that makes a lot of sense to do that. But the question remains here is that that's great, that's cool, okay, but even though that we cannot, even though that we cannot, well, send commands like that, right? Which to me is quite interesting and it makes a lot of sense, like so, right? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but a lot of sense. Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense, by the way. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's to say, okay, but again, how can we do that? You know. Again, this client component, as you can see, is just to provide now, is to provide this interactivity, right? Say, hey, now you actually are rendering this component, and this component only. But this is known as for control. Another thing that you can do is to say, hey, after all of those data has been evaluated, you want to actually capture that data. But this is interesting because not only that is that this component, even though there are now, so it throw an error because by default is these components are server-side rendered. These components are server-side rendered, man.
The only thing that you can't do this component that then takes over, right? Next.js is going to try to render everything on the server, even this. So that doesn't mean I can go in here and just like start doing browser stuff. I would still have to check to make sure that, like, you know, if I'm in the browser or not. But this is a client component. So remember, server-side rendering is this component is going to be rendered on the server, but then there's going to be some JavaScript that gets downloaded that is the exact replica of this component that then takes over, right? But we couldn't get to that point yet because I logged a window up here, which broke on the server because there's no window on the server.
So unless you tell, okay, because this is a very Next.js stuff. You can say, hey, if we are on the window, if the window exists, then I want to actually say, hey, I want to now console log the window, obvious like that. So it means that by the time it renders these components on the server, which will do, so if you call that, it say, hey, it also failed here. Throw an error, it say, hey, window is not defined. Okay, so if window exists, so then I want you, but this is interesting because it's now it's server-side rendering there on the client, is server-side rendering, and then the client version that contains interactivity takes over on the client side.
That's server-side rendering. A server component is like the same thing, except for there is no JavaScript front.
So that server-side rendering, server component is like the exact. So server component is that there is no JavaScript here. So there is no interactivity. There is no JavaScript on the front end that takes over.
That takes over, right? And the entire.
Exactly. There is no JavaScript. There is no JavaScript code on the front end that takes over, man. So you can take a look at here in the network, and you try to load this, right? It actually sends that, all right? And now loads the page, but as a JavaScript, because the bundler behind the scenes actually is doing that.
Higher component is executed on the server, so I can do database things. Like I couldn't come in here and like log process or use Redis or async. I couldn't do that here. This would not work because it's not executed on the server. It's just
It's not executing on the server, it's rendering on the server.
rendered on the server. So that's how you would do that. You would just use client. And that also means you can use client components in server components and vice versa. The only thing that you can't do is pass props between them, right? Or, I'm sorry, you can't pass non-serializable props between them. So what does that mean? Let's say I have some props here that
Exactly,
says,
you
like,
can pass non-serializable props here. This server and client side component is from the perspective is who this server and client side component is who component is based upon who is rendering. This server and client side component is based upon who is rendering. And by default, in Next.js, everything is server-side rendering.
change, right? It says on change prop, which means it's probably a function, okay? Then I go to page, and I'm like, cool, yeah, on change. Like let's pass in a function here, something like that. Like hello, okay, and then we try to refresh.
So you can pass you can pass only serializable data. Not date, functions, circular reference. As props.
This, it's going to break. Event handlers cannot be passed to client component props. If you need interactivity, consider converting part of this to a client component. Right, it literally tells you. So what does that actually mean? It's saying, hey, the reason it says that is because you cannot serialize a function. If you don't know what I mean by serialize a function, this is what I mean. So if I go into the console and I do something like this, right? Let's say I say JSON dot stringify this object, right? This object has like a name called moose, and then it has like an action, and this action is a function that does something. Okay, if I stringify this, what do you think the JSON is going to look like? I guess it doesn't like that. Let me be specific, since it doesn't like when I do that. Okay, yeah, it's totally going to blow up. Well, hold on, I guess I'm missing a bracket here. There we go. Okay. So what it actually did was it just didn't carry this over, this function, right? Because it can't serialize you can't serialize logic, at least not this way, not with stringify. There are ways you can do it, and some people do it, but by default, it's not going to get carried over. And because you have a client component and a server component, that communication has to go across the network barrier. So it has to go through the network. And to go through the network, you need to be serialized, because you can't just send code through the network. It has to be something that is understood, data, in this case JSON. But when you try to stringify a function, yeah, it's not going to be there. So this is why you can't pass functions as props, because they can't be serialized. There are other values that can't be serialized as well, like dates. You can't serialize a date. You can't serialize recursive things that are like cyclic in nature. So an object that point.
Recursive things.
To itself somewhere, can't serialize that. So things like that, you have restrictions around that. So those are the only caveats.
Okay. Give me a second. I'll be right back. se me... Uy, ¿qué pasó con la cámara? Ahí va, perfecto. Ah, hola, ¿qué tal? Gracias. Falta la cuenta del VPN. Aquí la tiene. Perfecto. Bueno, y más bien, gracias por la bienvenida. Y bueno, no quiero quitar mucho tiempo, porque me imagino que están bastante ocupados, porque trabajar con un banco genuinamente, y especialmente con React y todo lo que es la parte tanto del frontend como el backend, y tratar de unir todos los cablecitos bueno, yo no tengo que decirlo. Vamos. All right, and here we are. There you got it. You got it. There you got it. There you got it. There you got it. And okay.
Now we're going to set up all the stuff we need to actually create some to-dos and pull our to-dos into our app and stuff like that. In order to do that, we need some type of storage. We could use a JSON file, but it's so free and easy to set up a database these days, so I figured we just set up a database and just get started with that. So let's just do that. My favorite way of doing that is using something called Prisma. If you've never heard of Prisma, it's basically just an ORM, a type checked ORM. If you don't know what ORM is, it's an SDK for a database.
It's an SDK for
That's literally it. Like,
yeah, period. It's an SDK for the database. Software development kit, right?
It's an SDK for a database.
For
Prisma
databases.
is an SDK for mini databases. So you can pick whatever database it supports, and you still get the same code experience no matter what database you support. So you don't have to like.
Which is exactly here. So an ORM is like an SDK. So no matter which ORM you get, that's a good analogy. And here we are slowly getting ourselves into the data, which is the realm of what I want to dive into.
Oh, I need to know SQL for SQL or Postgres, and whatever Mongo's query language is for Mongo, or this thing for this. Nope, you just use Prisma and it works for every database. So it doesn't matter. It's pretty sick. So we're just gonna get started with that.
It's pretty wild. It's pretty dope. It's pretty sick. Okay. And then we look at Prisma, which is now a convention. Prisma has become now a convention on the
whatever database it supports, and you still get the same code experience no matter what database you support. So you don't have to like, oh, I need to know SQL for SQL or Postgres, and whatever.
So Prisma is an ORM, object relation mapping. Is a type based, it's a type safe ORM, which is pretty sick. Oh my god, there is a lot of things going on. So Prisma is a type safe ORM. Oh my god. No, oh my god.
Mongo's query language is for Mongo, or this thing for this. Nope, you just use
Exactly. So so it's a type safe ORM. And an ORM, so object relationship management. That's what an ORM is at the end of the day. So object relational mapping. Okay, so it is an SDK for databases, which means you are going to get the same developer experience. As important, that's crucial here. It means that you're going to get the same developer experience regardless the underlying query language. So you don't have to know Mongo.
Prisma experience no matter what database you support. So you don't have to like, oh, I need to know SQL for SQL.
Exactly. So you don't have to, oh, I need to know SQL for SQL databases, or Mongo for SQL databases, for SQL or Postgres.
Or Postgres, and whatever Mongo's query language is for Mongo.
Exactly. Or whatever Mongo query language for Mongo. However, I want to make a clear distinction here. I want to make a very clear distinction in that. And it's important to understand how that things work. Very, very important. Because this is for you to understand the basic and the fundamentals, so then you can now build on top of that. And this is very, very interesting and powerful, and it makes a lot of sense, because that's how we make sense of the world, through stories. And the reason why actually I'm recording all of this stuff, what I'm doing here.
Or this thing for this. Nope, you just use Prisma and it works for every database. So it doesn't matter. It's pretty sick. So
So it is pretty sick. An SDK for databases. And this SDK is that an SDK is guaranteed you the same developer experience no matter the underlying architecture. And this is also a very interesting I want to bring that up because to me this is critical and crucial. The YouTube, but specifically the specifically the Jesus, oh my God. Evolution of software architecture. Um, oh my God. Do you know what? How many times I have brought this video today? Several, because it's huge, man. Is huge, man. Is huge, and I know people actually don't like my response and all that kind of stuff because it's like, hey, we shouldn't recommend drugs and all that kind of stuff, and I get it. I'm not here to actually do that, but is when we talk about a layer of abstractions, which is how now we have developed these computations or these software architectures to make sense of what is the underlying thing so we don't have to worry about that. So for example, in the case of Fortran, so Fortran stands for this formula transcription. Again, it's very explicit in its name. It's actually tell you what it's doing, right? Is now in the first golden age of programming in 20th century, as Grady Butch mentioned, is that we have now this way of how do we compose systems through algorithms. And because back then we having because it requires a lot of time for a computer to process something, and we don't have that luxury. We need to think very careful about what are the set of instructions and how to do that. And this is very important to recap, man, because now with all of this research that we have available, we are like a fish in the water, as he described. We don't know the entire journey that has been passed through for all of these previous developers to understand now what are the power and the benefits of doing this kind of stuff, right? And I think the more you gain that perspective, the better it is for you. So if I try to actually is run this, and if I say, hey, I want to run this, say start build, well, anyway, what about Fortran? I think I use Fortran in other realm. I don't know if realm. No, I don't know if Jesus. What the French does. Mm, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Is this works? Experimental Ruby-based Fortran realm. Oh my god. Oh, holy crap! And I get it why they're trying to do this because. Oh, okay. No, but show me in English, in plain English. This is quite interesting because now you have this L Fortran, right? But again, I'm just, even though def for Fortran, that's right. Is this Fortran, right? Is this Fortran? No, I think, is this Fortran? No, I don't want the translator. But it's interesting because it also translates all of this instruction. It's like, okay, stop, enough. Yeah, this is Fortran. Interesting. And then you have subroutines and another subroutines. The parameter here you're defining is the variables here, and then this decomposition way to actually create all of this series of steps. Holy moly. The mantle image in color, the mantle broad image in grayscale, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know why you're forcefully trying to translate this website. I don't even ask you for doing that. You somehow, okay, no. Okay. All right. This is actually to look at the fractals. This particular pattern, when you divide stuff, this is the exponential here. If you round this, it's actually to calculate is this. So hey, I want you to now is based on this. I want to now perform these computations, print it, and finalize is the program here, right? Very simple stuff here, by the way. And all of this set of instructions, that needs to transform into the language, in particular into holy moly, there's a lot of layer of abstraction here. But in any case, all of this stuff to actually be more human, interactive, and easy to reason about that for doing that kind of stuff. So why am I bringing here Fortran and this particular stuff? Because
the entire history of software engineering
is something that I want to broad that from gratitude.
is one of rising levels of abstraction.
Is one of rising level of abstraction, and there's a lot of people actually that are complaining about that. It's like, hey, you can use AI or any of these LLM models to do that. That's not fair. I mean, you don't actually write the instruct. You don't tell the machines explicitly is assembly lines. So you don't write assembly lines. You don't tell the machine is that, hey, I want you to move these registers to this and then to the another place and then put some data inside of that. So no. You don't tell that to the machine. You rely is on layer of abstractions that actually is easy to work with. So that's why, and this is something that one of the React Brian Holtz. Okay. Brian Holtz like this. Yep, like Brian Holt. System design here. Evening, right? How's it going, everyone? Welcome. How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Javier Gonzalez. Anyway, that's great. Good. So Brian Holt, right? So Brian Holt, that's one of the things that Brian Holt mentioned, is that um, so yeah, it's like yeah, I actually made this stuff, or actually make this quick pause, just to describe that now how this process is works,
Fundamentally,
especially of the layer of abstraction, and how now it's interesting because Brian Holt, uh, software engineer that has previously worked at Microsoft, Netflix, and Reddit, and also in Stripe. And he's currently the product, the product, the PM, if I'm right, the PM Neo databases, something like that. That particular company, where he mentioned in React courses from Front-End Master is like, and this is something that resonate with me vastly. Again, stories. Story is how do we make sense of the world. Where he mentioned, hey, what you understand is, once you understand how do we get here, you will embrace complexity. And trust me, so now after a couple months later, when he mentioned that, to me was like, oh, son of a, I mean, sorry, it's like, oh my God, oh Jesus. And Brady Butch actually mentioned that.
the entire history of software engineering is one of rising levels of abstraction. So what we're seeing,
The entire history of software,
the entire history of software engineering,
again, computation, software engineering is to raising the level of abstractions. So it means that, for example, he is, initially works on, that's quite interesting. Grady Butch initially worked at using, so the first programming language was assembler, okay, and now currently he's working on Python. You know what I mean? And that's great because that means that things evolve and continue to evolve. In like business and in life, everything evolves.
is one of rising levels of abstraction. So what we're seeing here is the rise of another level of abstractions, which gives us all these extraordinarily powerful frameworks from which I can build systems, and which, as I alluded to, the architectural decisions that were front and center for us back then are now embodied in these. So now becomes a
Wait, what?
from which I can build systems, and which, as I alluded to, the architectural decisions that were front and center for us back
The architectural decision that were front and center us back then, the architectural decisions that were front
then are now embodied in these. So now becomes a decision, what cloud service do I use? What messaging system do I use? What platform do I use? That's the decision which has a lot of economic decisions and not just software kinds of decisions associated with it. So I think the role of the architect in effect has changed, because now I'm dealing with systemic problems, not just software problems themselves.
Grady Butch is a trailblazer.
My respect, man. My respect, man. My respect. My respect. And, well, because of that, well, that's why now when we talk about Prisma, which is the entire history of software computer, based on, yeah, the entire history of software computer is based on rising the level of abstractions. So Prisma is another level of abstractions. So we don't have to say, hey, if I need to work with SQL, I need to learn SQL, or if I work with Postgres, I need to learn Postgres, or whatever query language MongoDB is using, I need to MongoDB. No, you don't need that. You just only have one single developer experience. That's why it is called like an SDK. Prisma is like an SDK for that. It's a type safe object relation mapping. Oh, that's pretty sick, man. That's pretty sick. That's pretty sick, man.
So, and then another one is npm install at Prisma client at Prisma / client at latest. That's not a dev dependency, so you can hit enter on that. So just those two, Prisma and then at Prisma client latest. Once you get those two installed, then we just need to set up our database. We'll just use SQLite, which is basically like SQL that's based off a file, so that way we're not like trying to go and at latest. That's not a dev dependency, so you can hit enter on that. Just those two, Prisma and then at Prisma client latest. Once you get those two installed, then we just need to set up our database. We'll just use SQLite, which is basically like SQL that's based off a file, so that way we're not like trying to go host a database somewhere and do all that. So once we have those two things installed, so Prisma and then Prisma client latest.
Interesting. One of the Prisma is the actual. Okay. Slowly but progressively, things are starting to make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh.
We can just do something called npx, Prisma, init, which is short for initialized. And we can run that, and it's just going to tell us a bunch of stuff that we don't need to care about right now, but I'm just going to walk you through what it did. Basically, what we got here now is on the root of our app, we should see a Prisma folder. then something called a schema.prisma. Right, everybody see that? Actually, you know what? I'm going to start that over. I'm going to delete it because I just realized I can add another flag to it and it'll generate some more stuff for me. So I want to do Prisma init, but then I want to say data source provider, SQLite, like that. If we do that, it'll create like some other files for us as well. That's really cool. So I'll leave that up for a little bit. npx prisma init -- data source -- provider SQLite. I'm gonna run that. And then what that's gonna do, same thing. Like, I guess I didn't do the thing that I thought I was gonna do. I guess you don't have to do that. All I did was just change this to SQLite, whatever. That's cool. I'm cool with that. So this is a schema file. If you've never written a database schema before, this is what you'll probably do a lot. You'll have to go into some schema file and write a schema. But Prisma is really chill. It's based off of GraphQL and JavaScript. So if you're familiar with GraphQL, or if you just know JavaScript, which I think everyone here does, writing a schema is actually really quite easy. So we're just gonna write a schema for our to-dos. So I'm just gonna make a new model using the model keyword. I'm gonna say to-do, like that. And I'm gonna give it an ID. I'm gonna say its ID is type string. I'm gonna use this @ sign to say this field is annotated as the ID field. I'm saying this field is the ID field. And then I'm just gonna say I need to give it a default. And because it's a string, I can use this built-in UUID function. If you don't know what UUID is, it just stands for like universally unique identifier. I don't know how to explain it other than like it spits out guaranteed unique strings.
Exactly.
It's like the best way I can describe UUID is like to use it.
It's guarantee to spit out some unique strings.
Let me do another one. There we go. So here's a UUID. And every time I do it, I get a new one, right? So the database will just do that for me automatically.
Which is great.
Like
Like using the incremental.
So that's all I'm saying is like make that a UUID, and then I don't know. A to-do might have some content whose type is string. It might have a created at whose type is I think there's like type dates time, and then there's like a special at where's it at? Oh yeah, at date time, and then like default to like now, something like that. I could do another one that says like completed.
This is all of these
Boolean,
Prisma schemes that you can
is.
have access to this global, another layer of abstraction. That's the entire history of software
we're not get too crazy
engineering.
In the full stack course, we're gonna have like it's gonna be a crazy schema, but in this is pretty much it. And it doesn't really matter what database you pick, right? You can pick SQLite, pick Postgres. All this is gonna be the same for the most part. There's like some different directives that you might use, but everything to the left of the directives is pretty much the same, no matter what database you pick. It's pretty cool. And if you already have a database, you can just add Prisma to it. It works. It works pretty good. So we just need to migrate our database to get it set up so we can start using it. So we'll do a npx Prisma migrate, not migrate deploy, migrate. Let's do a help on this. I think it's migrate. Let me see. Let's do a migrate help. So I think we might want migrate dev. I think. Let's do that. So migrate dev. Then you can give it a name. You don't have to name it, but I'm just gonna name it init. And of course it breaks because we gotta add a database URL to our env file. Awesome.
Arrow database db URL start with the protocol file. Oh.
I have to name it, but I'm just gonna name it init. And of course it breaks because we gotta add a database URL to our env file.
Oh, of course. Do we get to add the
env
database?
right so
env?
should have an env file here on the root that Prisma probably created for us. If you don't know what an env file is, it stands for an environment variable file. This is a file in which you don't check into Git. So I just want to make sure I go into my .git ignore, make sure that .env is listed in here anywhere. Doesn't matter what line you put it on. And this will tell Git to ignore it. The reason you ignore this is this is where you put your secret stuff.
You put your
check
secret
this into
stuff.
GitHub, and it's something useful, people will have it. So we're just gonna put our database URL in here.
People will have it
which for
completely.
SQLite is
And then you can do some stuff, just does some fancy stuff called like
file.
rotation key, which is
So it's
not
just like
a
file colon
nice
/
way
dev.db.
to do
So
this.
we have that.
Because
run
you need to go to
migration.
all of these
Boom. It created a
independent
migration for us.
servers
Ready to
that
go.
actually use
Created
a secret,
database file for us.
and then
right here, something called a terminal,
spin data.
and we are ready to go on that. So now we're ready to actually use this data inside of our components that we can actually, do CRUD on the actual database and try to create some to-dos and list some to-dos and things like that. So, cool. Any questions on that? That was a lot, really quick. I know. I have all the code on the GitHub repo, so don't feel like if you feel like, oh, I need to catch up. It's all here. The links in the initial page of the notes, right here. Remember? So there you go. So check that out if you need to catch up. Question.
It's maybe more of a personal opinion question. I haven't worked with Prisma before, but I've worked with like Active Record, right?
Yeah.
In your your experience, is Prisma pretty easy to drop down into a raw SQL when needed for like those wonky migrations or that one lookup?
Yeah. So it also depends on the database you use too. Like for instance, if you use something like Planet Scale, which handles migrations for you, then you could, but you don't. Planet Scale doesn't want you to. Prisma does have the ability for you to drop down and get like pretty custom with like raw queries. I think it actually has like a .raw method where you can just do whatever you want. So yeah, I don't think it doesn't hide it from you, but it tries to do most of the stuff for you. Anytime you use a CLI, like in this case Prisma or something like that, you can just put npx in front of it, so you don't have to install it. So that's how you know whether or not you need to use npx or npm. You're probably using npm to install things or run a script,
running
package
script
JSON that you have
in the
here.
package.
You're probably using npx to run a CLI or like some other command. So npx, Prisma, init, and then that created our data source, our SQLite, all this stuff here, and then we just did a migration. We did a migration here to sync our state with the database, with the SQLite database. This is, you think of migration as like syncing the database. That's literally what a migration is. We've made some changes to our schema, and we need to sync those changes back to the database. That's a migration. Some people's job is just to write migrations. In fact, if something was going to go wrong in your app, it's probably during a migration.
Okay, smart ass. Okay.
Now let's create the ability to list and show all of our.
Let me actually is now. Sentiment analysis, testing and deploy to version. But this is now building an AI powered full stack Net.js app version 3. Okay. All right.
So what we'll do is we'll go to the app.
Question. This one. Exactly. Forms, routing, active and protected route, advanced server actions and validation. Okay. What the French toast is this? That was sick. Retrieval augmented generation RAG, structure output, human in the loop, interpreting approval with user and memory management. Okay. AI agent from prototype to productions. Let me continue to move on here because there is another. I don't know if you actually are using Prisma to that. I don't think so. No, it seems you don't. Then you say, hey, build an AI power. Okay. It's okay.
Dashboard to-dos page here, and this is where we want to pull in all of our to-dos, and we want to render them. So let's do that. Before we do that, it's probably a good idea just to make a helper function that will, because in order.
So Um, mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. Okay. So yeah, well, that'll be all for this video. All right. Take care. Bye bye.